Welcome to the Committee of the Board, Committee of the Whole Board for November 8th. The meeting is called to order. In attendance, we have Robbie, Joanna, Carol, Kelly, Margot, Amy, Shinyi, and myself. Joining us online are Jean, Donna, and
Joanna,
and that's it. Naveed has yet to join. Okay, so tonight, Robbie will be honoring the land.
Halton, as we know it today, is rich in history and modern traditions of many First Nations and the Métis. From the Anishinaabe to the Arawandurun, the Haudenosaunee, and the Métis, these lands surrounding the Great Lakes are steeped in Indigenous history. As we gather today on these treaty lands, we have the responsibility to honor and respect the four directions: land, waters, plants, animals, ancestors that walked before us, and all the wonderful elements of creation that exist. We would like to acknowledge and thank the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation for sharing their traditional territory with us.
Thank you, Robbie. Joanna, would you like to move a motion to approve the agenda?
I move that motion.
Okay, is there any discussion? Okay, I have a suggestion. Seeing as how we're running behind schedule, I did have one item on the agenda that I was going to speak to, which is item 3.4. So what I'd like to propose is striking that item. It's not urgent. We could deal with it another time. So I'd like to amend the agenda and remove item 3.4. Are there any objections to making that change? No? Okay, great. So seeing no objections to that, the agenda is approved by unanimous consent as amended. Okay, are there any declarations of possible conflict of interest for this evening? All right, seeing none. This evening we have for approval item 2.1, minutes of Committee of the Whole for October 11. Carol, would you like to move a motion to approve the minutes?
Yes, please.
Okay, is there any discussion? Okay, seeing none, the minutes are approved. Oh, actually, there's discussion. Question to Carolina. I had made two suggestions earlier today about the reason why we went into private and a line item about trustees who were interested in a working group. Have those been changed? Or will those changes be made?
Following tonight's meeting, they'll be made.
Okay, yeah. Perfect. Okay, thank you. All right, is there any other discussion on the minutes? Okay, seeing none, the minutes are approved by unanimous consent. Okay, so that brings us up to discussion items. And we have this evening a few administrative procedures and one policy. Curtis, would you like to call upon those who are going to speak to the APs?
We've got Superintendent Taha online. Superintendent Roddick is here.
Good evening, everyone. I'm not sure if my administrative procedures first or Superintendent.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so you know what? So whoever has privately purchased services can go up first.
Okay.
Okay, Colette, go ahead.
That is me. There are very minimal changes to this AP, essentially a date change and an update to the department name change.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions on that AP? All right, seeing none, thank you. Next,
Carol does.
oh, sorry, go ahead, Carol.
Just a couple of quick questions. Sorry, I'm not super familiar with this AP. So the first one is, who does it refer to? Like, who are the professionals and paraprofessionals that this would apply to? The first question. And the second one is the reference to the Halton Region Police School Board protocol. I was just wondering how it connects to that protocol. Thanks.
Yes, through the Vice Chair to Trustee Baxter. The AP applies to any service that you would pay for in the community. We sometimes get asked if those services could be delivered within the school setting. So, for example, someone who's receiving private speech and language therapy, or sometimes we've been asked for counseling to occur in the school. So it's any service that you would pay for privately. It cannot be delivered while on school site. With regards to the police board protocol, it references the criminal background check.
Thank you.
All right, seeing no other speakers, thank you, Colette. Next up is safe driving, which I believe is you, sorry.
Yes, thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Good evening, trustees. Minimal changes also to this AP. A date change and a couple of housekeeping revisions. The AP speaks to the practices and expectations that board employees are bound by when they are on board business driving board-owned or leased or rented vehicles. So it sets out those expectations and requirements. And as I said, the changes or the revisions are minor, a date change and a couple of housekeeping revisions. Thank you.
All right, are there any questions from trustees on that item? Okay, go ahead, Joanna.
Quick point, number 13, there's a section, no, I think it's just number 13, smoking not permitted. Should that also include vaping?
Number 13. Yeah, thank you for that observation, Trustee Oliver. We can certainly include vaping as another prohibition while driving. Thank you.
All right, seeing no other speakers, thank you, sorry.
Thank you.
Up next, we have the student use of guide dogs, both as an AP and as a policy. So for both items, Colette, you are up. Thanks.
So I'll start with the policy. There are essentially no changes to the policy with the exception of a date change. With regards to the AP, in addition to the date changes, you'll see that we have added details around a memorandum of understanding with St. John Ambulance so that their therapy dogs can come into our schools to do wellness activities. But beyond that, no further changes.
All right, I'm looking to the speakers list. Go ahead, Margot.
Yeah, so Colin, I do have a question. So I see that memorandum of understanding that's been added. I have had several phone calls over the past couple of years about the concern that this has not been happening in schools right now, the therapy dog coming in around exam times. Can I just confirm or dispute for the people who've been asking, was that due to COVID protocols or there was just some concern? So I'm just trying to get to the bottom of where that was coming from, particularly that this is now included.
Yeah, it came to light that the practices of bringing therapy dogs into schools, not specific to St. John, but just in general, or any other therapy animal into a school was not following the procedures laid out in the admin procedure, specifically around the veterinarian certification, training requirements, training of the handler and of the animal. And so we paused animals coming in until we could work with one agency in particular to ensure that their services meets the criteria that's set out in the Memorandum of Understanding. So we can return to a practice with those animals. Now, schools will still need to follow the procedures set out in the admin procedure, specifically as it relates to ensuring that all accommodations for other reasons, creed, disability, medical, are accommodated and a plan is developed. So if we're bringing in a dog for a wellness activity, the principal needs to develop a plan to accommodate students who have a fear of dogs or who are allergic to dogs, et cetera. So that, yes, they can, but there's a process that they have to follow.
Thank you. And it's really great to see that you do have that piece put it in there so that there is that ensured step-by-step piece to make sure that it's okay and is working well. So I really do appreciate that, and I think our community will as well. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other speakers, thank you for those presentations, Colette. So just a reminder to everyone, at the November 15th board meeting, the APs that we went through tonight will appear in the consent agenda, and the policy will appear for decision at the next board meeting. Okay, so we are now up to 4.0 committee. No, sorry. I've got too many papers in front of me. We are up to 3.2. Jennifer and Rosanna are going to be presenting the expulsion suspension report.
Okay, and I'm looking for some support maybe to get connected. Join the Google Meet. I don't think I have a link to it, so apologies. Thank you, and then I'll just join it quickly. Thanks so much. There we go. I had to turn my mic off. There we go. Put that on there. Don't need that. And then we're going to share this one. Share. I'll move it over between us two. Yeah. And I'll just go to slideshow. That's good.
That's perfect.
Okay. All right. I'm just going to share the microphone here.
There used to be two.
Good. Okay. So thank you very much, everyone, for the invitation to attend tonight's committee of the whole meeting. As discussed at the October 18th board meeting, we are here tonight to share the student census data as it relates to suspensions. That was referenced in the report, so I'm not going to go over the report again, but this is the data piece that was missing. I'd like to, again, take this opportunity to thank Dr. Rosanna Bisceglia and her research team for helping to set the context in order to discuss this data with you. And I'm now going to turn things over to Dr. Bisceglia.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. There's some new faces that I haven't seen before. It's a pleasure always to be here. And I'm hoping that we can keep things light and interactive. So please feel free to ask questions along the way. So today I'm here to talk about, of course, the disproportionalities in suspensions and expulsions. But I also would like to ensure that we have a shared understanding or a shared framework for how to interpret the information that I'm about to present. So we'll talk about what does it mean to have proportionalities and disproportionalities, and we'll do so through examples to keep things light. But I am inviting you on a learning journey. There's been lots of learning that I've had to do as I've embarked on this work. And so I'm inviting each of you to hold space for each other because we're all at different places in our learning journey, but also to own your own particular learning and hold yourself accountable for the learning that is required of us. So with that in mind, I'm asking you to set a personal intention. So this is done privately in your mind. Set a personal intention for today's learning. This slide comes from the authors of a book, Street Data, that talks about transforming educational systems in a just way. And so they talk about these intentions when we're receiving information, recognizing that no one knows everything, but together we know a lot. So each one of us has unique experiences, unique expertise, unique knowledge. Sharing that knowledge with one another enhances all of our understanding. Another intention is to embrace an abundance mindset. So sometimes when we think about disproportionalities and the world that we live in and the various risks that communities face, sometimes it feels overwhelming to think about, what can we do to address the trauma or whatever risk factors that students face? So here today, I'm inviting you to embrace an abundance mindset, to think about the possibilities as opposed to think about what is not possible. Another intention is that we can't be articulate all the time. Sometimes our thoughts sound really good in our mind, but then when they come out, they don't sound so articulate. And that is just being human. And so we are going to be, graceful to each other and assume positive intent, but also understand that there is an impact. And the intention at the center speaks to the importance of having an open heart and an open mind when receiving this information. Because we want to ensure that we're centering the voices of those students who are being disproportionately impacted in society at large and in our educational system. So I'll give you just a few seconds to just think about a personal intention that you'd like to set for yourself before we begin looking at the information. So before we get into the data, I thought that we would have a little bit of fun to think about how can we have a shared model for understanding proportionalities. So let's imagine that we're going to play a little game. We each have a loonie in front of us, and we're going to flip this coin. And we know that by flipping that coin, we have a 50-50% chance of getting heads or getting tails. Now let's say that our chair and vice chair want to be the first one to go and play the game on their own, and they're going to flip and flip and flip and flip. What would we expect to be the outcome of those flips? Would it be any different than the original sort of flip that we had done? We would expect it to be the same. Right? So the probability doesn't change irrespective of which trustee is flipping that coin. So let's say that Trustee Ahmed and Trustee Daniele also want to join in on the fun, and they start flipping the coin, and we're still having an expected outcome of around 50-50%. Now, all of the trustees are wanting to join in on the fun. I couldn't fit all of the faces in there, but all of the names are in there. And you can see that if we continue to flip the coin, we have a proportionate outcome between heads and tails. Sometimes a little bit more heads, sometimes a little bit more tails, but overall, we're hovering around that 50% mark. So that is the expected outcome. That is what we would describe as a balanced and proportionate outcome in what we would be expecting to see based on what we know to be true of when we toss a coin. And that is simply, that's what proportions are. Okay, it's a part, share, or number considered in comparative relation to a whole. So our comparative relation with the flipping the coin is 50%. We know that to be true. We're not going to question that. We accept that to be true. Proportionality is the quality of corresponding in size or amount to something else. So I can say that our vice chair perhaps tossed tails more than heads, but relatively speaking, we're still hovering around that 50% mark. So yes, we can flip and flip and flip, and we expect a 50-50 split. But what if we see something like this? So now we're seeing that specific trustees are showing a different pattern of results. So we see, for example, that Trustee Ahmed and Rosha are more likely to toss heads, while Trustee Bryden and Sribalan are more likely to toss tails. So now we're starting to see disproportionalities. We are no longer seeing results that are hovering around that balanced mark. So while it is true, if you go home tonight and you get your loonie and you start tossing away, it is possible that you might get 8 tails out of the 10 trials that you toss. Okay, it's possible. However, if you continue to toss the coin, eventually that probability will converge to a 50-50 split. And that speaks to the importance of looking at trends over time, as opposed to looking at specific individual trials. Okay, any questions so far? So now we have a shared understanding of what a disproportionality is. Disproportionate means being too large or too small in comparison with something else. And disproportionality is essentially just being out of proportion. It's a very straightforward definition. But somehow when we start to talk about disproportionality in the context of human outcomes, there's confusion. So we'll just stick to the coin as our general framework, and then we'll add in the human outcomes slowly. But I want you to remember that there is an expected outcome that is based in theory. We don't just make it up. It's based on mathematical equations, modeling, statistics. There is a real expected outcome that one is looking for. So proportions matter. They are all around us. And I invite you to think about if you were an adult with baby feet, you might have the cutest feet within your adult friends, but you would face some significant challenges going around the world and literally and figuratively keeping pace with your peers. And unfortunately, we live in a world where we know this to be true, that there's societal patterns that show that there's specific communities that disproportionately are impacted by risk factors, whether that's poverty, whether that's health disparities, whether that is educational disparities. We know that to be true. So from a human rights perspective, we don't expect a 50-50 outcome. That is not the expected outcome. So what is that expected outcome from a human rights perspective? When we look at the Human Rights Code, when we look at our provincial anti-racism directorate standards, even our Ministry of Education equity strategy, they tell us that the percentage of individuals in a given outcome or program or opportunity should be comparatively proportionate to their representation in the population. So there is a balance between the expected proportion that we have in our HDSB population and the observed proportion in the outcome or programs. So what does that mean? Well, actually, before we say what does that mean, why is that? So let's say that we have a question about who is in our gifted programming. And the way that I would phrase that question is, what are the student proportions, right? So who are the students that are proportionately represented in the gifted programming? We have the HDSB population on the left and our outcome on the right. A disproportionality in an outcome in the gifted program, for example, and I didn't know that Colette was presenting today, so that's completely, but a disproportionality would imply that for students of various communities, their intelligence is distributed differently than what would be expected from the normal distribution. So I won't go into the normal distribution at great length, but just to say that human traits are normally distributed by and large. So we have specific proportions that are represented on this normal distribution. To expect that certain communities would be represented in the gifted program or whatever outcome at higher rates or lower rates than their student population would imply that for that community, their intelligence or whatever human trait you want to change are not normally distributed. And that is simply not true. Going back to that 50-50% of the coin, it would imply that only certain communities have a normal distribution that's shown in the red line, and that other communities have either a green distribution or a narrow distribution or no distribution at all. So that is just not what we know to be true from statistical models, mathematical models, and models of human behavior and human evolution. So some real world data of how this plays out before I get into the HDSB, and we're getting there, I promise. So there was a review of the Toronto Police Service, all charges. So this is looking at their database of all criminal charges. And the question was whether the Black community in Toronto is over or under or equitably distributed or represented in the charges in the Toronto Police Service. So if we continue with this logic of what we know to be true and what would be an expected outcome from what we know to be true, Statistics Canada states that the Black population in Toronto is 8.8%, and this was 2015, I believe. A proportional representation in all charges would predict approximately 8.8%. In reality, Black population consists of 32% of all charges in their database. So we have a disproportionality there. What we also know to be true is that other racial groups and white individuals are actually underrepresented in their data. So you have an overrepresented population for one community and an underrepresented statistics for another community. Likewise for child welfare. So this is looking at children who were removed from the home and placed in care. Again, for Black population in Toronto, 8.8%. We would expect that to be the proportional. And what we know to be true is that 40% of children in care are Black. That is a huge disproportionality. So we followed this process when we examined our student suspensions and expulsions, in addition to a number of additional outcomes that have been presented here in the past. So for tonight, I'll be speaking about the suspensions and expulsions for gender at registration, gender identity, sexual orientation, special education status, multilanguage learner, and race or racial identity. So we've talked about proportions in the population versus proportions in the outcome. One way to put all of that information together is to develop what is referred to as disproportionality index. And this index gives you that expected outcome. So we know that life is way more difficult than 50-50. But what is that expected outcome that we would expect to see if our suspensions and expulsions follow a just model, meaning that everyone has an equal represented community profile in our database. So the formula that I will offer here, and this was given to us by the ARD, the Anti-Racism Directorate, is simply the percentage of students from Group A, whether that is our multilanguage learners, our learners with special education needs, in a particular program or outcome. So in this particular example, we're talking about suspensions, over or divided by the percentage of students from that group in the overall population. So again, we're talking about overall population and the expected outcome. So as an example, this is fake data, but I just want you to see how all of this comes together to get at that index. So let's say that in HDSB, and again, this is fake data, girls make up 10% of our population. And we want to know what is the disproportionality index for suspensions when it comes to girls. And let's say that girls represent 30% of our suspensions and expulsions, but yet they represent 10% of our population. So when we put together the formula, 30% divided by 10%, that gives us an index of 3. So how do we interpret that? We interpret that by saying that girls are 3 times more likely to be suspended than their representation in the population would predict. That is our index. And the expected outcome, again, would be a 1. So the first variable of interest that we looked at is gender at registration. So this is not gender identity. This is gender at registration. And at the time, it was a binary field. And so we do only have female and males as gender at registration. The black line is the expected outcome of 1. So that would be parity. That would mean that there is a correspondence between the population and the actual representation in the outcome, which is suspensions and expulsions. So we have data for 2 years here represented, and so we can see that boys are 1.57 times more likely to be suspended than their representation in the population would predict, and that's for 21-22. And for 22-23, the pattern holds true. They are still 1.54 times more likely to be suspended or expelled relative to their proportion in the population. Females are actually underrepresented based on what their representation in the population is. So a question that, comes for me as I support schools and I support the various leaders of the board is, of course, what is leading to this, right? And what are some response strategies that we can implement to mitigate against whatever forces are happening that would result in these disparities. But certainly the conclusion that there's something innate within boys that makes them more likely or more prone to suspensions and expulsions is not the conclusion that we would hope that any of us would land on. The next variable is gender identity. So this is how students identify on their own on our student census. And there was a various list of different gender identity options, and those were collapsed in the term gender diverse, because we simply did not have sufficient numbers in each of those categories to be able to do a proper statistical analysis. So across the 2 years, we still see the trend where students who identify as boy-man are 1.6 or 1.5 times more likely to be suspended or expelled relative to their proportion in their population. For sexual orientation, again, we have straight and heterosexual, and then sexual diversity, and this is, again, a self-report by students. And here we actually are at parity. So we have proportionate outcomes. So that is an area of success for us, but it does lead to some questions as to why, again, from a programming perspective, that this is the case. For students with special education, and that specifically applies to IEP. So as long as there was an IEP flag associated with students, they are included here. We have disproportionalities with students with an IEP being 1.77 times more likely to be suspended or expelled, whereas students with no IEP are actually underrepresented. So a question that pops in my mind, even as a parent, is, how well are we supporting our students with special education needs if it reaches a point of suspensions and expulsions? Our multi-language learners is another area where we do see parity. And so we are seeing that expected proportionalities relative to their representation in the population. And then we have racial identity. We have data for the 2 years. And I'll note that this is very similar trend to other school boards where our Indigenous and Black students, Middle Eastern, and Latino, Latinx is an interesting population because we actually did see an improvement in those disparities with the trend going down last year. But our Indigenous and our Black students are, 1.7 to 1.3, 1.6 times more likely to be suspended and expelled. So again, following the logic of the normal distribution, following the logic of what we were saying about boys and girls, there's nothing about racial identity that makes one innately, likely to be suspended. It is a systemic response and one that warrants attention. So, now what? Now, what do we do with this information? So as school leaders, we have a mandate, a legal obligation, and a moral obligation to ensure that our classrooms are just for every single student that walks through our door. And we respond in a number of ways. There's the belief that disparities come about from external forces, whether that's, poverty or other kind of societal influences. And so institutions ought to provide equal opportunities for every student, and that is our mandate and that is our goal. Another approach would be the equity approach, where everyone gets the supports they need. So this, in U.S. terms, is often referred to as affirmative action. But in this picture, you can see that one student has 2 boxes, another student has 1 box, and the other student has no boxes, and everybody can see. And so we might applaud and say, okay, great, we've done our job. Everybody can see the game. But there's also a just model, and the just model advocates for the removal of barriers. And so when we're thinking about disparities, our job is to think about what are the systemic barriers, and that is the mandate from the Anti-Racism Directorate, the Ontario Human Rights our Ministry of Education. And that picture, the barrier is the wooden fence. So can we not just remove the wooden fence and replace it with a gate that allows everybody to see? And often what I hear is, but what about? And the slide is left blank on purpose. What about poverty? What about the students who are coming from war-stricken countries? They have trauma. What about students with, several exceptionalities? They have really high needs. Can we possibly meet the needs of every single student and every single societal factor that comes into play? And perhaps it's a lofty goal, but I think as educational leaders, we ought to try. And so for this evening, I'll leave you with this analogy. That when students enter our classrooms with their storms, whether that's poverty, whether that's drug addiction at their home, whether that's multiple exceptionalities, when those students meet our calm, co-regulation occurs. What does co-regulation look like? It's really that opportunity and that ability to be the best selves and to achieve their own specific potential. Thank you.
Well, thank
I'll
you.
take questions.
Yep. Thank you for that. So I'm going to look to the speakers list if anyone has any questions. Go ahead, Robbie.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Thank you for the presentation. A handful of things. First off, is this one of the things we were talking about is whether this is administrative data or survey data. Is this data tied to suspension records, or is this self-reported out of the student survey?
So the identity information comes from our student census, which received close to 90% participation rate. And then the census, it's not a survey, it's a census. And so it was identifiable. It was linked to student number. And so we used the student number to then link it to all of the administrative data, IEP, suspensions, academic achievement, and so forth.
Okay, so then this is knowable for academic outcomes and could be applied to various other, I assume, is being applied?
It actually has already, and it's been presented at board last year, and it's actually available on the public webpage on HDSB Student Census. There are presentations there where academic achievement, the disproportionalities have been published there.
Mm-hmm. And then in this regard, in specific to suspensions and expulsions, I guess taking this and in the report that we saw previously, it was raised that we acknowledge these disproportions exist. How has that informed our behavior and action? And I think this is more of a question for Superintendent Taha.
Absolutely. So I did talk a little bit, and there is some of it written in the report, but I'm happy to go through it a little bit more. Obviously, the knowledge and the acknowledgement and the awareness raising is sort of our first approach, and certainly that's something that we've been doing. So Dr. Pasheglia has been joining us at our Family of Schools meetings. We've been talking about the data, and we've been bringing that awareness to everyone's attention. This year, we're really truly focused on partnering with our Human Rights, Equity, Inclusive Education Department, as well as our Indigenous Rights and Inclusive Education Department, and finally, our Student Health and Mental Wellbeing Department. So Safe Schools, for example, is partnering with all of those departments in order to engage in what we'd like to call a human rights approach to progressive discipline. We are looking at things like helping our administrators to understand mitigating circumstances, helping them understand their own bias and recognizing the bias that they bring to any situation that they are working through. having a framework of an anti-oppressive framework when they're discussing discipline matters, engaging student and parent voice in discipline matters and working with families, really focusing in on procedural fairness. You heard Dr. Bishaglia talk about a just classroom and really understanding the role that parents and students play in ensuring and upholding procedural fairness. We also really look at, and you've heard other departments talk before about a whole person approach and truly identity affirming spaces. So those two pieces would speak to that proactivity rather than the reactivity, which is where we really do want to spend our time. And so, there are a variety of different things that we're doing in the education piece, but also engaging in dialogue with administrators when they're making decisions. So our Safe Schools Department, whether it's Assistant Principal Coquel, myself, their own superintendent, perhaps reaching directly out to the system principals that are responsible for human rights, equity and inclusive education, Indigenous rights and education, student mental health and well-being. These people are all involved in consultation when there's a question, and we are asking to learn more about the student lived experiences as well as the identity of the student. And sort of taking all of that into account, we're really looking at developing a better critical consciousness that's going to help us make better and more just decisions. So that's kind of an overview of a lot of things, and I'd be happy to get into the specifics. I just don't know how much time we have tonight.
Time. Go ahead, Shinyi.
Thank you, Vice Chair. So first, thank you for this presentation. Before presenting the data and give us the knowledge about the statistics and the data analysis. So this is for all of us because we are not the specialists in this field. Thank you very much. And so for this purpose of this report, I noticed that in this report and this presentation, actually, they don't match for me. Because for this report, it presents the suspension and expulsion data in the past 3 school years. But the presentation is more about how to read this word. So, sorry. So but these issues are actually, there's no data support in this report. So in the final report, we will add the real data to support this claim. For example, this, in the first page, the last paragraph. So this is ongoing issues, problems. We are doing the research and analysis. So because this report will guide us to make smarter decisions, or this can be 2 things we can do. For example, we need to allocate some resources for certain groups if they are facing challenges. So we need to allocate more resources for them. Or we can see some groups, they are facing some discrimination, and this is anti-racism or anti-discrimination. The work we need to add more work. We need to put more effort to do. So that means if we saw some group, they have higher representation in the data field, in the data, and we can see, does those cases are fairly treated? If this is fair, so I cannot say anything because under the human rights law, everybody must be fairly equally treated. If this is unfair treatment, then we need to consider this a discrimination. Do we have a systematic discrimination exist? So this is 2 different things we need to handle. There's another thing I just realized. One example in this presentation is that we need to remove the barriers. So barrier, of course, for students' achievement and well-being, we need to remove the barriers as much as possible to support them. But there's one thing we need to consider. Not all barriers are just we can remove or it's just we should remove. For example, at this 2-3 months, a lot of parents registered their children to AP program, IB program, iSTEM program. For those programs, there's a a limitation. So there's a number limitation of the seats for admission. So even in our website, it says this is competitive process. So this is not everyone. We can open the door to accept everyone who submitted the application. So this is, I believe this is also a very fair case. Thank you.
Just in the nick of time, Xinyi. Go ahead.
I was just going to respond. So the initial report that was presented to you did not contain this data, as you remember, due to the fact that Dr. Bashegli wanted to come to discuss this. So I will work with her to ensure that when we bring the report as discussed next year, that the data is there. I'd also, consider if you feel that that's a necessary thing, I can work with her to see what that might look like in this report. But regardless of whether it was identified the specific numbers, which I think we have a little bit of caution around that number, we have acknowledged the disproportionality and the overrepresentation in this report, which does talk to the work we have to do, which helps to inform our decisions. So I just wanted to share that. And I don't know whether there was a second question in there. Oh, right, just around the just and the removal of barriers, which we'll leave.
I think it was an observation.
All right, next up is Carol.
Through the Vice Chair, thank you so much for that report. I think the timing, as you mentioned, having just had our PD on Spec Ed, the comment that students do as best as they can. All students want to do well, and they do their best, and it's our job as adults to facilitate that. And I think this follows on really well from that. I just had two questions about the data. One was about the data around students with IEPs. Did you look at specific needs identified in those IEPs, or is it just student with IEP versus student without? And then I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. So for the purpose of this data, it was IEP, all IEP, whether it's formally or informally, and it does include gifted, but we did not go further than that.
Okay. And then the second question is, I was just wondering how you decide which student characteristics to focus on. So you're looking at race, gender, and other immutable characteristics of students, but not socioeconomic status or characteristics, the existence of family supports or lack thereof. And I'm just wondering, is that information that you'd be looking at in the future, or if you could provide that?
So the variables of interest that were presented today, that comes from the mandate of our anti-racism directorate. We did add multi-language learners because we know that we have a large proportion, and so to support. But we could do these analysis ad nauseum, really, and we could disaggregate and disaggregate and disaggregate. Ultimately, we do analysis to support planning and programming. So, and we know that socioeconomics, of course, is a factor that can hinder educational outcomes. And we have other processes in place for that to ensure that there's equitable and fair and just resource allocations, and that every school has supports in place to support students at a disadvantage.
Amy?
Thank you. This is a question for the director, actually. I'm interested in seeing this type of analysis done in other areas, including EQAO. We do look at boys versus girls in IEPs versus students without IEPs and things like that, but to get a better sense of student achievement, it would be good to see for the literacy test, for the grade 9 math test, for all of those EQAO measures, perhaps graduation rates, students entering post-secondary, whether it's college, apprenticeship, university, workplace. It would be good to know that the demographics are moving through in the right proportions. And so I would love to see this kind of analysis done on more of the data that comes to us.
Thank you for that. Trustee Collard, certainly, I can work with Dr. Bichelia around that data. I do know that the EQO, for example, that you referenced, they actually scaled back some of the data that they provided to school boards this past year. They used to give us a lot more detailed results down to the individual students, and they have moved away from that. So I don't know to what extent we have the capacity to correlate the information from them with what we know about our students. Dr. Bichelia?
So unfortunately, we could not do these analysis for EQAO because it was not available. In 2018, 2019, there was the job action, and then EQAO was paused for COVID. So this year is actually the first return for our grade 3 and our grade 6. And definitely we'll look to do the analysis. We do have academic achievement based on report card data for 2 years. And we also have graduation. We have access to programs, whether that's French immersion, IB. So we do have a lot more data than what was presented here this evening.
Thank you. I would just say that if EQAO continues to not give us the data at the individual student level, that they're prohibiting us from helping students who may be in great need. That information is pivotal when class building and determining what supports a student might need. I can't believe they're not providing that anymore.
So just to clarify, we do have individual student results. We used to have the individual student results even by questions within. So they would break it down so you would know on a particular exam or what the student was struggling with, and that we don't have. But we do know how each student is doing.
Thank you.
All right, there are no other speakers, so I'll ask my question. So I guess what prompted me to ask for numbers was the comment made in the report about the disproportionate outcomes for our students who identify as Black and Indigenous, gender diverse, sexually diverse, and students with IP. So what I was hoping to get today is the appendix that had been attached to the report. For example, it read there were 865 total suspensions between 1 and 20 days. Of those 865, how many were Black students? How many were Indigenous students? That's what I was hoping to get from today. And I understand the concept of disproportion, and thank you for sharing those numbers. Is there a way to get more numbers for this specific appendix so we know exactly what we're dealing with?
What would be most helpful is to share the disproportionality indices, because that is what would allow you to know the communities that are disproportionately represented in the suspensions and expulsions. And that is because when you think about from year to year, there's going to be fluctuations in the total number of suspensions and the total number of students. The disproportionality index, the way that it's calculated, accounts for those fluctuations. And so you have an expected outcome of 1, which does relate to the proportion in the population. And what you would look for over time is changes in those disproportionalities relative to that 1. So we can provide an appendix that has the disproportionality indices for all the gender registration, gender identity, all of the racial categories, and so forth. But it would be amiss to have just straight numbers. It really is not as helpful, and it wouldn't be in keeping with why this information was gathered. It wouldn't be in keeping with best practices in addressing gaps systemically.
And if I may just add, the disproportionality index tells us all we need to know. in terms of what actions we need to take. It's quite clear the data is consistent, and it is it's irrefutable. So I think for us as a board, we just need to apply what we know. Looking at some of the things that Superintendent Fowler mentioned earlier around our biases, the way we interact with communities and different identities, students with special education needs, how we as a staff, how we are interacting with them. That changes everything. Once we know the disproportionality, and that as Dr. Bichelli says, we know to be true. These are indisputable facts. So once we know that, we know all we need to know to take action.
Okay, so my question is, can those numbers be put in this report so that it's a more fulsome report, so that we understand everything that we're dealing with?
So we can put in, I just made a note here to add the disproportionality indices. So those numbers can be put into the report. Yes.
All right, thanks. Marco, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm just wondering, so the indices that you're speaking of are specific to this board, or those are the general?
No, they're specific to
Okay.
our students and our board.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. I thought
And they
you were talking
relate
about-
specifically to the numbers the Superintendent Fowler included in that suspension report.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
All right, so seeing no further questions, thank you both for that presentation. Up next, we have Margot, who will be addressing correspondence from the chair.
Hi, so I'm going to try to make this relatively quick. Over the past 2 years as chair, and prior to me, there has always been a section on the agenda for correspondence from the chair. In that letter, what I have traditionally included has been letters from other boards, letters from the minister, and letters from reputable provincial organizations. So more recently, there has been some question as to what is being included and what is not being included. And I didn't know if we can have, as I said, want to be quick. So I don't know if it might be an idea to form a committee to take a look at what's included in the correspondence from the chair. For me, the importance of that piece is ensuring that we are transparent to the community and they know the information that we're getting from the ministry or whoever it's coming from that is helping to guide our decisions or policies that we are making. So I'm just wondering really from voices from the table, would you like to create a committee to take a look at what is included in this section? Do you have any ideas about what you think should or shouldn't be included in this section? I'm asking the questions.
I'll open up the speaker's list if anyone wants to start. Okay, go ahead, Robbie.
I think there's sound rationale for both of the first two pieces. Letters from the ministry are helpful information for trustees as well as for the general public. And we frequently act on them in some way, shape, or form, particularly when they're calls for input. Letters from other school boards, again, we sometimes act on. They're pieces that we sometimes choose to amplify. And if we're directly copied, that's appropriate. Should that reach a point of saturation, which it hasn't yet, that might change. Reputable provincial organizations is a fuzzy, subjective category. And that one automatically brings up challenging questions as to what's in and what's out. In many ways, there's that calls into question whether it should be there at all. And at the same time, I can imagine examples that would be appropriate for the chair to be sharing at least with trustees, if not with the broader public, about public interest issues being raised to the board by groups that don't fall into either of the two categories we just discussed. So I'm waffling on that one.
All right.
So again, might this be an idea to create a group to discuss this in a subcommittee? Or are you happy with the chair making the executive decision what's included and what's not?
Does this, sorry, just talk it through with me. If it goes to committee and committee comes back and says we think X, Y, Z should be there, does that then go into procedure somewhere, or does that simply provide guidance for whoever?
So currently there's no guidance. There's just a section on the board agenda, correspondence from the chair. So what's included in that correspondence from the chair currently is down to the chair's discretion.
Right. So I was kind of going forward in time. We strike a committee comes back, creates a report and says we think this should be included. Where does that fit in our current policy infrastructure, procedure infrastructure? And I'm asking that question from the perspective of, is there a group that already owns this, whether that's governance policy review committee or otherwise, to whom this task should simply be assigned?
That can be another solution. I'm happy to. Amy?
Yes, I was just going to let you know that the Governance Document Review Standing Committee just had a meeting prior to coming into this room this evening, and we discussed in there having terms of reference for the chair and vice chair, and that would include those kinds of things in it. And as with all terms of reference, it would be a document that would come to the board for approval. And it would be something that could be visited on an annual basis as the landscape changes, because there are a lot of pieces to the roles of chair and vice chair that might not be readily apparent. There are a lot of extra things that come along when you're chair or vice chair. HUC meetings and Minister of Education weekly calls and those kinds of things. And on top of that, the correspondence. And so I think that might be an excellent way to approach it.
That sounds perfect. So are we agreeing that to leave it to the governance committee to take a look at this through their terms of reference for the...
Actually, sorry, that's not what I said. The chair and the vice chair should design them and then bring them to
the governance committee.
No, to the board.
Okay.
For discussion, so a committee of the whole meeting.
Okay.
And then vote on them at a board meeting.
Okay. So then we'll leave it down to the chair and the vice chair to outline the roles and the responsibilities that they have in their role. Bring it to the board for discussion at a committee of the whole meeting of a future date. I think it's much better for the governance committee to do.
Sorry. So I'm going to interject, because having terms of reference for what a chair does and what a vice chair does is one thing. What is included as correspondence from the chair is something altogether different. I always interpreted correspondence from the chair as letters we as a board sent out to the ministry, to OPSPA, to whoever, to the police services board. That was always my impression, that whatever letters we write, we would include so that the public was aware of the letters we wrote, and that's why it was called correspondence from the chair. And then somehow over the last few years, we've started to include letters that we get or letters we get from other school boards. So I think it goes back to, I think we need to figure out, what do we want it to mean? Do we want it to mean correspondence from the chair as in letters we send? Or is it, and I see some heads nodding, and perhaps what we could do is letters we do receive from OPSPA, from the ministry, maybe we can include those in the consent agenda as items for information. But then we still have the problem, well, what do we include in that? You know, do we include an email we got 100 times from 100 different people, or do we include one letter from a reputable, air quotes, organization? So how do we decide that? So those are my thoughts. Anyway. Okay, Kelly, then Carol.
So you are totally correct. The original intent of the correspondence was correspondence from the chair. And up to that point, any correspondence was not captured on in any way in any of the agendas. It was not even necessarily put on the website. So we felt that it needed to be shared with the public because it was stuff we were trying to do in the advocacy part of the board. So that is why it became a piece of the agenda. My thoughts are around, I think it should be part of what is included in the agenda and the definition of what gets included in the agenda. So that would be part of governance, but it should be part of, so a definition of what those pieces are. And I'm personally, I don't believe that we need to be sharing all the information of all those letters that we get from other school boards and stuff in our agendas, but that's just my opinions.
Okay. Carol, go ahead.
Just quickly, I'm totally in agreement. I mean, obviously, I'm new. I'm only a year in, and so that's what I perceive that section to be is, the agenda and, as a whole is our way of demonstrating to the public what it is we're doing. So the work that we're doing, what we're discussing, what we're working on with staff, that's all in the agenda for the public to see, and then observe the meetings if they want to actually see the details. And so anything that we're sending out on behalf of the board by the chair, I think should be included in the agendas. I think that's important. Information that, we receive a lot of information, both as individual trustees and as the chair. And if we decide that we are going to act on that information, then it probably should be included in the agenda for information so that there's an understanding of where our actions are rooted. But other than that, I think what we've found recently is that our agendas can be used as a tool for amplification. And I certainly wouldn't want to see us going in that direction where, groups are providing information they'd like the world to see, whether it's accurate or inaccurate. It's not really our role to be disseminating that through our agendas.
Okay, there are no other speakers. So question to you, Marco.
Yep.
Seeing as how the section is currently called correspondence from the chair, would it be okay that we only put correspondence from the chair as in signed chair of the board?
100%. So, and again, I know we spoke about this earlier, just because past practice is what we have always done doesn't mean it's right. So I think that this has been a historical way of doing this, that the letters from other boards and other bits and pieces have been put in there. But again, as we recognize now, as it being correspondence from the chair, maybe just look at the letters that we as a board have written. So that sounds fine to me.
Does that work for everybody? Okay, so that solves dilemma A, the letters we send out. Then there's still the other question, letters that we receive. And I think that's the one that we still need to perhaps give more thought to. So would you be okay with perhaps sending an email to everyone and collecting their thoughts as to what should be included in the consent agenda, or perhaps nothing at all?
And yeah, I like the process. I would just add a piece of how you want to communicate that information to trustees. It may not need to come through the agenda.
Yeah. For one more week. Okay. All right. Go ahead, Amy.
I just wanted to suggest that an email might not be the right way to go. Maybe create a Google Doc or a spreadsheet and ask people to submit their ideas. That way it's one-stop shopping and you don't have to read all the emails and sort them out.
I can do that.
All right. Recognizing we are behind schedule, we are now up to, what are we up to? Oh, Curtis is on track. We are up to standing committees, and we've got board self-assessment standing committee. Go ahead, Kelly.
Thank you. Earlier today, I sent out the trustee meeting guidelines for the 2022-2026 term to everyone. I don't know if you remember back in, I think it was June, we did an exercise where we looked at some past rules of the road and deemed what was important for us as trustees for when we were in meetings, to what we thought was important, and that's where those titles came from, because one or two of the groups came up with a different areas where they thought things should fit, and then we pulled things into that. Now, understanding that overarching everything is the trustee code of conduct, and that is what is intended to instruct and guide us in our roles, not just at meetings, but as part of our role at all times. So we thought that we wanted to make sure this tied back. So the piece that we wanted everybody to remember when we're in meetings, we wanted to make sure we tied it back to the code of conduct, pulled out some of the important pieces we wanted to remind people about, but also used some of the language and the words and tied back to the code of conduct, some of the things that people felt were important during meetings to try and that were important for all of us to be aware of during those meetings. So anyways, I hope people have had a chance to look at it. This is part one of this. So this is the first piece. So we were hoping that we could, hopefully people would be able to have had a look at this. And if dependent on the feedback, we would then make a motion to bring it to board to be used as something as a guideline for our meetings. I don't know if any of the other committee members, which is Joanna, Donna, and Margot, sorry, if you would like to speak to it.
So I'll just quickly speak, Kelly. So the one question I was asking, I do remember the last time this came to the board, and I just was wondering if were we not looking at a way to consolidate? And I know I asked you this question, everything together into one document so that there wasn't complementary documents.
That wasn't what the discussion was at the time.
Oh, okay.
I'll open to the speakers list. Amy, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, with the document, what's the intention now with respect to the document? Is it something that will reside somewhere? Is it something we want to? The information in there is pretty much the code of conduct. So I'm kind of wondering. We have a code of conduct, so what do we do with this?
Okay, so it was felt in the past, and some of the trustees from previous boards have said that they liked having rules of the road in front of them at all times so that they could look at them and remind themselves about the proper decorum in the board and the things that they should be thinking about. And so that was sort of the intent, that we would maybe somehow have it something that was be stuck in front of all of us so that it's there and you can look at it and say, this is all part of just a reminder of how we should be acting and listening, accepting, building trust with each other, working together, and just generally sometimes when situations get more heated, sometimes it's good to look at something and say, okay, we all have come from different places. We all have, different points of view. Let's honor that. We don't make assumptions. We're going to listen, and then we will. So some of that.
Okay, could I follow up, please? So I'm wondering if, because this is a rather lengthy document, and for something that you want to put on the board in front of us, I'm wondering if we would want to take out the big categories. So listen, discuss, teamwork, respect, and perhaps a few other key words from this document, and put those up instead of trying to put all of this up, because I think it's a lot to read.
That's actually the intent, but we
Okay.
felt the preamble was necessary so you could see how it tied back to the code of conduct and that it all is the same thing, but we're trying to pull out the important pieces.
Perfect.
Carol?
So again, I start with I'm new, so I don't have a good feeling or understanding of how previous boards worked. But I'm thinking that a lot of these reminders that you're sort of referring to, Kelly, if things are getting heated and we're not necessarily remembering to be kind to each other and to ourselves and that kind of thing, I'm wondering if that is more of the role of the chair or vice chair to pause the meeting, give everyone a minute to take those 5 deep breaths or whatever we do to recenter ourselves, and maybe remind everyone as a group, what we're here for and that kind of thing. Might be more effective than having it written in front of us. And my suspicion is that if things are kind of going awry, chances are the people who are causing that to happen will not look at it and realize. It would be more the others in the room would be looking at it thinking, why are they not doing this? That's just, I'm happy to have something on the desk. It's not that I'm opposing that. I'm just suggesting that if we do run into a situation that I'm perceiving may have happened in previous boards, is to lean a bit on our chair and vice chair to kind of stop everyone and pace the meeting a little bit and bring us back to where we need to be. And maybe it's a break or whatever it might be. I've just found in general that sometimes demonstrating a behavior or thinking something doesn't really help another person to get that message. I'm just thinking of times where I've been with someone who's speaking really, really loudly, and I have this idea, if I speak quieter, maybe they'll speak quieter, but it never works. It's never, in my history, ever worked.
Okay, would anyone else like to add to that? Okay, so I'm hearing a few different things. I'm hearing that we probably don't need this document, but it's important to know the concepts. I'm hearing some people would like a little thing in front of their microphone to be reminded. Others don't. I'm hearing some of these elements already exist in other documents. So I look to you, Kelly, the chair of the standing committee. Hearing what everybody is saying, what are your thoughts on next steps for this document?
I could take it back to the committee and we can have a discussion based on what we've heard tonight, and then we can make a recommendation.
Okay. Joanna, did you want to add something? That's okay.
So I see this document really as kind of a report back from the committee that puts things into perspective, provides the context, and ties it into the trustee code of conduct. And I do agree with Carol. The job of managing the discussion falls to the chair and vice chair. but I don't see any harm in having, a little note posted at our desk to kind of help set the tone and remind us how to kind of, position ourselves, firm our thoughts, take that pause. I think I personally found it very helpful as a new trustee, and I've had such a thing at the front of my desk for 2 terms. We also used it with at the start of the term with all new trustees coming together to kind of set the tone for how the meetings will proceed, how what the expectations of us are, how we will collaborate in the boardroom, and to assist with that flow of commentary or questioning, discussion. So I would be in favor of deciding right here and now how we proceed. I don't think that much more needs to be done here, and there's no it's inconsequential, really.
I look to you, Kelly, because you're the chair of that committee. So I'm just managing.
So I guess I'm going to ask, is anyone opposed to having something in front of them that even if the chair and the vice chair say, okay, things seem to be getting a little heated. Remember, we are governed by our code of conduct, and we have some things in front of us just to give us a reminder, and it's a pointer that's there. I don't think it would be a bad thing. So in my opinion, it's not a lot. We could have it printed on a little piece of paper and put in front of everybody, and I don't think it would be difficult. No, but if anybody is really opposed to it, then don't look at it.
Sorry, my mic was up. Don't stick it if you don't want it. Okay.
Because I think there's a lot of good work here, and I think, and everyone has contributed to it. So
Yeah. So Kelly, just to wrap it up, would you want this document that the committee created? Do you want this document to live anywhere, or will taking some points and putting on a sheet be sufficient?
I think it could be tied into the code of conduct, maybe. I believe it needs to come to the board in a report so that at least there's a way to tie in where it came from to what it was from. And while the code of conduct already incorporates all this, at least there's a report somewhere that will help tie in the 2 pieces.
Amy?
So I have a suggestion. The annual reports from standing committees are supposed to be done by next week. Perhaps. No, we meet on the 15th. Our next board meeting is the 15th.
It was actually due last board meeting. But
anyway,
it's okay.
Anyway, it doesn't. We are digressing hugely here. I'm wondering if maybe this could be part of your annual report, and that way it will live forever in the agenda of the meeting, and we will have a formal report telling us about the work of your committee, and that way we will all have it.
Well, and it is a report to the boards.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which is what I was making it today. So, is everyone okay with that?
I'm seeing agreement, so
awesome.
You've got the green light, Kelly.
Okay, so that was only 10 minutes. But no, I'm not done.
She's not done.
I'm not done. Okay, so the big thing now is we took the last term's assessment and looked at multiple documents and upgraded it a bit and added some more questions. And I just sent it out to you all tonight. And I would like 100% participation on this because this is the foundation that we'll move forward from. We'll see how we assess our board now. And it will be the building blocks that will use the same form dependent on what's happening. Things might get added or subtracted, but will be for the next 3 years. So anyways, and because I actually have 20 minutes, but I'm going to give everybody 10 minutes they could complete the form now, and then it would be done.
Okay, everybody, open your emails, and that includes
at least they get
you,
started.
Jean, Donna, and Naveed. Open the document that Kelly sent out regarding board self-assessment and fill it out.
So this is anonymous. The only reason it has an email just tells me who has done it. It doesn't tell me what you've done.
Okay, start filling it out and go. I should put on some Jeopardy music.
So it says that I need permission to access the document.
So Naveed, you must not be going through your HDSB email address. If you go through your HDSB email address, I would guess you can access it, but if you go through an outside email address, it might not be accessible.
No, I'm going through my HDSB email address.
I did send it to you, Naveed, but I'll send it to you again.
Sure, please.
Naveed, I just sent it to you again.
Yeah, I was able to actually access it now.
Only fill it out once.
Yes, ma'am.
And in this evaluation, board is used to refer to Board of Trustees? Yes. Okay.
This is all about the Board of Trustees. It's not about the corporate board.
Kelly, the very, 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 very last question does not allow me to score it.
Give me a second. Jean, can you refresh it and try it again?
I will do so.
It won't change anything on your form. Jean, you might want to mute.
So if I said everybody has 2 more minutes, would that be okay?
Yeah, they'll just have to finish it off at home and promise to do it.
You're going to have homework. Okay.
So the reason I didn't know that we were going to be having, I thought I was going to hoping that the committee would be able to have this report ready for that, but I didn't realize it was for next week. That's why I thought it was 2 weeks.
So just, Kelly, just for Carolina's planning of the agenda.
I'm just going to take the one I made and then.
Okay, 30 seconds. Okay, we're going to continue because we've got a lot of updates to go ahead. And
Can
if
I just
anyone,
ask that
Oh, yeah.
everybody return this, have it done by Friday, please?
Okay. Thank you, Kelly. All right, so up next we have Joanna. Sure. No, you know what? I do have a bio break planned after the committee updates. So you're just like a little bit ahead of schedule. So, okay, if anybody, you know what?
Yes, I saw Sharina there.
Okay.
All right. So a copy of the student trustee policy and the student trustee governance procedure has been shared with you. You'll have two versions. One shows all the changes that were made to the version that you had seen, I guess, in December of 21. And then a version that is cleaned up with all the changes accepted. I will have to note that a few more changes were added yesterday and today. And so it's probably best to have a look at the marked up version so that I can take you through the new changes. Or at least that's where I'm looking. So maybe for you, it's better to look at the clean. All right, so first things first. Both policies were I guess, adjusted or reformatted to fall in line with our policy and procedure framework policy. And so the definitions have been removed and they were appearing in the framework policy appendix. Into the policy, we've added, under board references, we've added policy and procedure framework policy, as well as the Student Senate Constitution. The Constitution, you'll recall, is a new document. It was approved at the June 2023 meeting with signing off by the student trustees at that time and Director Ennis. And so we do need to have that reside somewhere. It does need to be referenced in the student trustee policy and procedures, and we'll have to determine where that constitution will reside so that it is available to trustees, student trustees, Senate, and staff advisors. Are there any questions on the policy itself before we move on to the governance procedure? And of course, the dates have been revised, so it will be next up for review in November of 2027. I'm not seeing any questions from anybody. Okay, so moving
Joanna,
on. Yep.
Sorry, Joanna, could I just ask a question? Does this policy, the way it's written, prevent us in consideration of having an Indigenous student trustee? Like, would that be able to be added before we're up for a review date? I'm just wondering, is there anything in here that precludes us, should we ever consider to do so?
I don't think so, because under 3.1, it says that the board shall have at least 2, but not more than 3 student trustees. So that certainly opens it up to an extra student trustee.
Okay, I guess it's just the process of deciding if we would add a third trustee. I'm not sure that, I don't think it's prevented, but I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, I believe that would be possible and facilitated if and when that is a desired option. Okay. Thank you, Jean. Moving on to the student trustee governance procedure. So again, the dates have been revised. The definitions will be moved over to the appendix of the framework policy. And here are the changes that I've made that will not appear in the clean copy, there were some revisions made to the meetings of the board section, specifically under point B. It now reads, student trustees have the right to a non-binding recorded vote. And section C was split into two parts. C will address the bit about student trustees not being able to, not being eligible to independently move a motion. And part D follows through with student trustees may, with sponsorship by a trustee, request an amendment to a motion. So we just split out the moving and the amending of motions as two separate points. And point E presents more clarity in that under the Education Act, it actually states that student trustees are not eligible to be present at a meeting that is closed to the public under clause, and it outlines the clause of the Education Act and the footnotes, or the footnote is provided there. And the student trustee mentor section was moved to the end so that we address all the pieces that are specific to student trustees. And the student trustee mentors part follows just before the legal references. And the wording there was tweaked as well. So part A, up to 2 trustees may be designated as student trustee mentors by the board striking committee. And part B now reads, student trustee mentors will provide orientation to student trustees prior to the start of the new school year and guidance throughout the year. Orientation should focus on governance and procedural matters. And as with the policy, we've added a reference to the policy and procedure framework policy. And that is it, I believe. Are there any questions about this?
Robbie has a question.
I don't have the revised policy in front of me. My question is around student trustee participation in private session meetings. Our practice has been that student trustees do not participate, but there is no, that they're only forbidden from participating when it is private because of individual information being information about an individual being presented. Does the revised wording, what does it tell us about whether they will or will not participate in private sessions when other matters are under consideration?
So if you look at the marked up,
I can't see it.
You can't open it? Okay, so there we've listed the exact wording from the Education Act, which states student trustees are not eligible to be present at a meeting that is closed to the public under clause 207, brackets 2, bracket B, 2006, section C, let's see, 10, subsection 6.
So it simply replaces the at the discretion of the director.
Yes,
with
that's right.
Cannot participate in this one.
Yes,
okay.
That is replaced with the exact wording from the Ed Act.
Okay, are there any other questions for Joanna? No? Okay, so Joanna, will you be able to provide a revised version for Carolina so she can include it in the board package? Okay.
I will. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Joanna. So Carolina, just as a heads up, part of the agenda for next week will be the student, Joanna, what are the exact names? Student trustee policy and student trustee governance procedure will be for decision for November 15th. Okay, thanks. All right, so move. If you need a bio break, now's your chance. No,
Amy still has to go.
So Joanna's going to take a bio break. Joanna, go ahead. All right. So up next is Amy, Policy and Procedure Framework. Go ahead.
Thank you. So we've been working on the Policy and Procedure Framework policy. We had been working on it in the spring, and we had to take a pause and wait for some legal reviews to come back regarding one section of it. We finally got that information, and we had our meeting just prior to this evening's meeting here. And we have gone through the way it's written, and we're happy with it. So now I'm bringing it forward, and it will also be in the board package next week, Carolina. Thank you. So I sent out the link about an hour ago. Everyone should have it in their inbox very close to the top. If you would open it up, everything that has changed has been highlighted. So that should make it easier for everyone to see exactly what's new. The rationale is almost entirely new, and it is pretty much just a statement from the Ed Act regarding the need to maintain policies and organizational structures and monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of policies developed by the board. Then under the objective, we added the words "and reviewed." Those words were not there before, and that's really a very important piece of ensuring that policies are continuously being improved and made up to date with regards to legislation and changes in the way things are done. Application and scope was added, and this was to ensure that we understand this policy applies to trustees and staff involved in the development, review, and revision. And we move into the policy itself and pretty much go straight into what is a policy. Broad statement of intent, governing principles and expectations that reflect the goals of the HDSB. Policies are drafted by the director or designate or board of trustees as appropriate, go into effect upon adoption by the board of trustees, and then answers the following questions. What is the strategic direction, and why is the policy necessary? And then there's the statements at the bottom that we shall reflect statutory, regulatory, and Ministry of Education requirements, and shall align our policies with and inform the multi-year plan. So this means that our cycle of reviewing policies and procedures on a 4-year cycle fits very nicely in there, because our multi-year plans are usually 4 years long as well. We have had 1 or 2 that were 5 years long. So it's a good, it keeps us in balance with the cycle. Policies are reviewed every 4 years at a minimum. Procedures provide a detailed description of how the policy will be operationalized, when the prescribed steps must be taken, who is responsible for implementation and oversight, what specific actions are required to comply. And there are 2 types of policies: governance, which is for trustees, and administrative, which is for staff. Governance procedures, as I just said that above, are for trustees, and administrative procedures are for staff. Again, they are to be reviewed every 4 years at a minimum. In the general section, talk about, put the word furthermore in there, because that is an additional review that would happen out of cycle. Policies and procedures shall include cross-references, dates, and reference numbers. And Carolina, we currently don't have reference numbers in place, and that's something that we can work on. I know that Jean Carrillo had done a bunch of background work on it and just hadn't finalized it. So that's something that we can work on, and that way it'll be done. The section that is brand new that we were waiting for from the legal framework is the consultation with school councils. It was brought to our attention last year when we had some delegations that there is a duty for school councils to be given the opportunity to provide input or for the board to actually solicit the views of school councils. And so we got all of the information about where those requirements reside and what they impact, and managed to take about 4 pages of legal document and put it into a few little paragraphs here. So there are 3 different situations. School councils can choose to offer input on any policies and guidelines related to student behavior, safety, and/or discipline, and school boards have a duty to consider their recommendations. Furthermore, school boards have a duty to solicit the views of school councils regarding policies, guidelines, and procedures related to conduct of persons in schools, appropriate dress for students, and student achievement, including allocation of funding, as well as policies, guidelines, and procedures specifically governing school councils, fundraising, conflict resolution, and reimbursement of expenses. In either case, whether the input was offered or solicited, school councils who do provide opinions or input or feedback will be advised of any actions taken on these documents. Down below, the reference documents have been updated to include the various sections of the Education Act, the Equity and Inclusion Policy, and the Ontario Regulation 612. The reason why the Equity and Inclusion Policy has been included here is because there is a tool that they are working on that is going to be used when people are creating or reviewing policies that will, it's like a checklist. Have you checked your bias? Are you aware of your bias walking into your review of this? And have you made sure that there are not undue or disproportionate impacts on any particular group because of the way the policy has been written? So the reference to the equity and inclusion policy is there specifically for that reason. And that is the end of the policy. There's not anything else that I can really add at this point, except that we are working on a governance procedure, and the work on that started with Jean Carrillo still here, and Tanya and I had a meeting with her, I'm going to say a year ago, where we went through a workflow and we determined, you know, what pieces do we give to Jean or Carolina now, at what point in time, and what is the manager's responsibility for those pieces, and how do we manage the workflow. And we have other pieces that we're looking at adding to that as well. So once that's been fully drafted, we'll be inviting Carolina to come and speak with us to ensure that she's good with how it's worked out, because we have to be partners in this. And so we don't want to, nothing about us without us, right? So that's coming, and hopefully around the January timeframe, because we don't have another committee of the whole until January. So it'd be nice if we had something that we were able to report on in January. So if there are any questions, I don't see anyone ringing in, so I'm taking that as a good sign, but if there are any questions, let me know, please.
I don't see any questions, but I have one. So the policy, is this coming to board next week for decision? Okay. So just a reminder to everyone, whatever items we're going to be discussing at Committee of the Whole, we need the items attached to the agendas on Friday so that we have enough working time to read through the documents over the weekend and not have documents sent to us hours before the meeting. So You know who you are today. Okay. Anyway, so Carolina, if you could add to the November 15 agenda that the policy and procedure framework policy is coming for decision. Is the GP coming? No, it's
No,
not.
that'll be January. And I did advise Carolina already.
Doesn't matter.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Okay, yeah, sorry. I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. There aren't any other questions. So Amy, thank you to you and to your committee for pulling this together and getting legal opinion, because I know that could always be a little bit tough to get.
Could I also take another maybe 2 minutes?
On what topic?
Just to give an update on the delegation working group. I did ask for it in the email.
Yeah, I know, but there's no time. We have to move along. I need to chair and get going. All right. We'll put you on the agenda for November 22nd. Okay, so next up, the ad hoc committees are going to provide a very quick update. And we're doing it now because this is the last committee of the whole for year one. And that's why we're doing our quick updates today. So first up, notification protocol. Margot.
Yeah, so this committee has had a really difficult time finding quorum to have meetings. So after this meeting, we're going to try to speak to the members of it. I know that Joanna and I had a look through the document, and I think Kelly might have done some more digging on it as well, but we're just going to have a meeting that we will look through the document, clean it up, and bring it to Committee of the Whole on the 22nd for final discussion.
Fabulous. Okay, we just bought ourselves a minute. We're still behind schedule. Jean Gray, would you like to provide a quick update on Inspire Awards, please?
Yes, very quickly from the Inspire Award committee. We have not met recently because a whole list of items that needed to be worked on resulted from our last meeting, and that work is underway. The actual video to promote the Inspire Awards is underway. I believe that Jason Meisner and Summer Sweetman are the two that will be filming, Sultan and Shrina, and they were in connection just even as early as or as late as today as to the picking the date. And they have chosen their spot to do the filming, and that filming should be happening within the next couple of weeks. We also have approval to move forward in terms of financing with the poster, and the communications people are going to be moving through that project with us. And there will be some other things coming out to the members of the committee within the next week, just some other developments, but that's a general movement forward for us. Okay, thank you.
All right, and Jean, before the committee actually puts anything into motion, are you going to bring the recommendations to board for board approval?
Absolutely, that would be required, yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you, Jean. Up next, Kelly, Fix the Finance update.
Okay, I'm going to take 5 seconds before that to go back to the Board Self-Assessment Committee and just put out there that we did the majority of us did profiles. What were they called? You know, the personality profiles that we were using as a tool to help team build. There's still an opportunity for the 2 or 3 people who didn't do it to be able to do it. And I would like to encourage them because it would be part of helping the team building of the rest of the group. So I'm just putting it out there. There is still an opportunity. So please take advantage of it. Now, back to Fix the Finances.
Sorry, just to is that the Peter Marshall? Okay, thank you.
So the other piece is Fix the Finances. We are having our first meeting next Wednesday, and that's it.
Fabulous. Okay, next one. Thank you, Kelly. Any questions for Kelly? Okay, great. We are up to Joanna, MYP Foundational Elements.
Okay, as you all recall, the MYP Foundation Elements Ad Hoc Committee was struck sometime last spring. The committee quickly then convened and met several times up until end of June in order to plan out a series of joint trustee and senior team PD activities for this fall. You'll recall we had a session on inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. That was delivered by Ken Jeffers, the Associate Director of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at OPSPA. And we had what Kelly just referred to, a series of sessions under the guidance of Peter Marshall's consulting around the Lumina personality types. This was also a joint PD activity between trustees and senior team, and the goal of this was for each of us to better understand our own personality type, and especially in how it affects our approach to work and communication. I think this was a really excellent exercise in helping each of us to recognize our strengths and the strengths of our colleagues. I see this as an especially insightful tool for the director in deciding which of the senior team members are best suited for a particular initiative, and for trustees as we work together and put our names forward for the various committees and initiatives. And so as co-chair of this ad hoc committee, along with Director Ennis, I look forward to continuing this work. And it is probably time for our committee to regroup and start planning ahead again. So more to come. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Joanna. Are there any questions for Joanna? Okay, seeing no speakers, that brings us up to trustee questions and comments. So I'll go to our speakers list. Okay, there are no speakers on the speakers list, so there are a couple of things that I want to share with you before we move to private session for items dealing with personnel matters. So a few reminders. The next board meeting is November 15, which is a week from today. It is an organizational board meeting, and that is where a new chair and a new vice chair, or I won't say new, I'll just say a chair and a vice chair will be elected for the November 15, 2023 to November 14, 2024 year. So if you are thinking of running for either position, kindly let your fellow trustees know so that they have a week to interrogate you. The next item is, because we are going to start a new year, I thought, hey, who wants to change things up? If you're tired of sitting in the same seat, maybe you want to sit somewhere else. Maybe it's a good time to play musical chairs. So something for everyone to consider. You don't have to stay in the same spot. So, but you might have to fight someone for their seat in case they don't want to move. Our next committee of the whole meeting is November 22nd. So Amy, there is another committee of the whole this month, but it will be our last one for 2023. There will be no committee of the whole meeting in December. The meeting we're having on the 22nd will largely consist of striking committee, and that is where everybody will speak up and say what committees or roles they would like to have for the upcoming year. So I did share with everyone a striking committee report that outlines every possible position and what the requirements are. So have a read. There's contact names listed in case you have any questions. So be ready to have that discussion on November 22nd. On that same day, we will also be having other committee of the whole type things because we have lots to do. So there will be an opportunity to talk about delegations on the 22nd. So you're already on there. Okay. And there's still no questions. So that means that our public agenda has now been exhausted. We are now in private session. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, everybody online.
Are we off?
I think we're.
Okay, so live stream is now off.